Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a moment. Just wanted to briefly show my face and say hello. My name is Dustin Reekman. I'll be leading you through today's presentation on the Greater Egypt Long Range Transportation Plan. So as we're going through, if you stream of consciousness have a question, feel free to throw that in the chat or the Q&A box. Stephen Eibendal and our team will be keeping an eye on that. And then we'll have a time at the end also to bring you on live if necessary to answer any questions you might have. So we definitely appreciate your time and your participation in the project. And I will get started right now. So this is the second public meeting that we've had for the project. We had one last year. If you happen to attend that, we were about a third of the way through the project. We had done a lot of our existing conditions, but we had not gotten very far as really details and setting the goals and objectives and looking at specific projects. Now, as you're going to see in a moment, we're near the end of the project. So we definitely have a lot more information to share with you all. And again, appreciate your time and attention here this afternoon. I believe this presentation will take less than an hour, and we'll see how much time we have at the end for any questions you may have. So we're going to go through a quick introductions, show you where we're at in the overall project progress, talk about those visions and goals, financial analysis, projects, and next steps. So on the line today, they will not be speaking unless they need to answer some questions, but some familiar faces for many of you: Carrie Minnis, a longtime executive director at Greater Egypt, and Mike Z, who has replaced Joe Z. If you've had transportation interactions with Greater Egypt or SIMPO, Mike is now sitting as the director of transportation planning and is a wealth of resources as well. So if you're familiar with this area and this how transportation has worked, there's the Greater Egypt area, and we're going to go over the 5 counties and kind of what was included in this study. But within that, nested within that, in the Carbondale Marion area along the Route 13 corridor, there was an urbanized area established, and that's the SIMPO part of the region. That's a Southern Illinois MPO. So SIMPO and Greater Egypt are located in the same building. They share the same staff. So they're very analogous to each other. Just one focuses on these urbanized area and Greater Egypt focuses on the rural areas. But the point that we want to start with here is these plans are not plans for the sake of having plans on the shelf. SIMPO has been very effective at leveraging planning efforts to get more dollars, get more things built to support the transportation needs of the SIMPO area, and Greater Egypt has already done some of that as well. You can see on the screen, $8.3 million in grants that have been awarded based on the planning efforts that they've done. So this Greater Egypt transportation plan is a strategic plan that will basically fuel these efforts moving forward in the rural areas of the 5-county region. Again, my name is Dustin Reekman. Live on the call with us today from our team are Peter Williams and Stephen Eibendal. And again, they've had key roles on the project. You've probably seen their faces if you've been to other meetings or participated in any of our local workshops. So to back up, if this is your first public meeting related to this project, Greater Egypt is effectively a 5-county economic development organization at its core. So these 5 counties are the 5 counties that were included in our study area as well: Jefferson, Perry, Franklin, Jackson, and Williamson. And then we excluded that SIMPO urbanized area that I mentioned a moment ago. You can see it in the hatched out kind of, in Jackson and Williamson County. So that area has its own plans and its own funding streams. We're looking at everything outside of that. And the study is multimodal. So we often default to thinking of cars and trucks when we think of transportation, but we're also looking at transit, bikes, peds, and air. This was a slide from our first public meeting, and we focused a lot last time on that existing conditions report portion of the scope. Today, we're going to focus much more on the future conditions and the financial and project plan. So this is our overall schedule. You can see we're well into the process. We're near the end. So this is one of our final items that we're going to be doing. I'll talk about next steps. We have one more set of meetings, and then we'll be issuing the final report and wrapping up the project. But if you look down the left side, you can see all the different elements that have been involved and accomplished so far in the process. And we're now in the documentation side and sharing with you all as interested members of the public to get your feedback and to hopefully inform you on some things about your communities. So last time we spoke, we were very early on in the goals stage. So we were at that time trying to set a vision, like what does transportation mean in our area, in our communities, in this 5-county region? And what do we care about as a people? What do we care about when we think of transportation and how it affects our life? So we had to establish a vision and we had to establish some goals. And as you're going to see as we proceed through this presentation, these goals are super important because all of our projects and how we prioritize them tie directly back to the goals. So the vision statement, I know you can read, but I'll go ahead and read it to you. The Greater Egypt region will be known as a land of opportunity, a strong region with a vibrant economy and pristine natural environment that make it a choice destination to live, grow, and prosper. So with that vision in mind, and this was all done with your input, with stakeholder input, with local leadership. So there's a lot of thought put into that vision statement and into these 6 goals. So the 6 goals, first and foremost, is always going to be safety, increasing access to opportunities, increasing financial sustainability, supporting active and healthy living, preserving natural resources, and increasing your economic resilience. So each of these goals then gets broken down into objectives. And then these objectives are basically broken down into performance measures. So if I say we want to improve safety, ultimately we need to be able to measure that. So if we do the projects we want to do in the after state, we should be able to measure and say, yes, safety is better because we invested these dollars in these transportation projects. So I'm not going to read all these objectives, but as I flip through each of the goals, you can kind of take a glance at the objectives and you can understand how we are objectively going to measure the impact on each of these goals. So, increasing access to opportunities, for example, would be things like supporting the regional workforce, because that's directly affecting people's opportunities to work. Increasing financial sustainability, we have 5 different objectives under there, but just to pick one, minimizing the impact of transportation investments on taxpayers and local governments. Supporting active and healthy living, that's kind of at face value, but things like bikes facilities, pedestrian facilities, so our families can be out and be active, but also things like increasing access to healthcare, which most people may not think of immediately. Obviously, your region is just a wealth of natural resources. It's one of the top strengths of the region as identified by everyone. So preserving that is really important. So you'll see some objectives here related to things like environmental conditions and flooding and even greenhouse gas emissions. And then the final goal, increase economic resilience. So you can see here things like supporting investments that increase the ability to recover quickly from disasters, right? So what can we do with transportation that gives us some insurance, gives us some resilience when it comes to our economy? So that's really what this is all about. So we had our vision, we have our goals, we have our objectives, and it's really through that lens that we start thinking about projects, right? Because ultimately what we want to do is get projects built. And to do that, you have to know which ones are needed and which ones are most needed. So as dollars become available, how do we prioritize those dollars in the 5-county region? So we did a pretty comprehensive call for projects. So we basically reached out within the 5 counties to the county engineers, cities, villages, other transportation agencies. And we said, hey, we don't have money, but we need to pretend as if we had money. What projects are important to you? What have you been wanting to get done for a while? Where do you fall short in your budget? What do you really want to get done? And this gave us a very broad, comprehensive idea of what types of projects are needed, not just immediate like maintenance, although that's in here, but things like new corridors, new bike paths, things like that. And a really important footnote here is IDOT was not solicited for a call to projects, right? Because they already have a plan and it's public. And so they have many, many projects, as you're going to see here in a moment, that are already planned. They are already funded. They already have identified funding streams. And part of that has to do with the capital bill that was passed. And we're going to talk about that in a moment here. But just so you know, it's a mix of IDOT and all your local agencies and governments. And when they submitted these, they needed to categorize them, right? Are they new roads? Are they improvements to existing roads? Are they multimodal, meaning bicycle or pedestrian facilities? Even things like streetscaping and enhancements to the existing transportation infrastructure in that way, and transit as well. These are all things that were identified as types of projects. Really important, and I've said this a few times, these projects all had to be tied back to those goals. So we agreed collectively that those are the goals. So any project should be weighted or measured against those goals. And it could certainly meet more than one goal, and the best projects, of course, do. almost every project is going to have some safety component. And then, and then we kind of double weighted safety, right? Because safety is super important to everyone. So checking the box that it does really help safety in most cases, there's the other 5 goals too. So we had to really sift through these with that in mind. I think this is a really interesting slide. So if you look at all the projects, we had 147 projects identified in the 5-county region. Pretty impressive, pretty impressive. Many of those were IDOT, but definitely not all of them. And you can kind of see a lot of them are near term. So we're going to talk in a moment about funding and kind of what's coming down the pipe. But to bury the lead here, you're going to see a lot of road construction in your communities. There's a lot of projects coming and some underway, but 147 projects, a total cost of $865 million in those projects. Again, the footnote there, you're probably familiar with a concept called the Southwest Connector. It has numerous names, but this basically new major highway corridor in the southwest part of the study area, it alone had over $800 million price tag. So it is not included. It would completely skew this pie chart. But excluding that one, 865 million total. And then by dollar amount, you can see how these projects break down. 80% of the submitted projects are an improvement to an existing roadway. And that's very much in line when you go back and look at the goals and look at things like being smart with how you're investing, economic resilience, basically taking care of what you have, right? It's not these major new corridors and that sort of thing. It's really taking care of what you have primarily, 80%. And then that remaining 20% gets split up between bike and ped projects, bridge projects, and a little bit of new roadway connections and corridors. So we've talked about the projects a little bit, right? And we're going to talk about specific projects in a moment. But you can kind of see there's a lot of projects, kind of what they break down into. So the other side of this scale, of course, is money. So if we have a lot of projects, how much money do we have to fund those projects? So I'm going to go through a very high level here. You're going to have an appreciation, if you don't already, about how complex transportation funding is and what your elected officials, your county engineers, and people like that have to deal with these monetary systems, if you want to call them that, these programs. There's a lot to it. So starting at the very top, federal money. So you can see this pie chart. There's many different federal programs that end up funding our transportation needs. The biggest is the National Highway Performance Program, and followed by the Surface Transportation Block Program. But you can see programs on here specific to like air quality, railroad crossings, carbon reduction. So there's a lot going on, but it's a big pie. There's a lot of money, and there was a fairly recently they approved a new federal transportation bill, which is great from this perspective because it gives us a lot of certainty. You know, many years we go extending these old transportation bills, and we don't really know what next year is going to look like. We've got a pretty good roadmap now on the federal side as far as funding streams go. So if we look down at Illinois specifically, so how does Illinois apportion their funding and their federal funds? So they do it through 3 major programs. We kind of throw these on. You may hear the term STP thrown around, Surface Transportation Program, basically. And there's STP Rural, which is largely what we're dealing with our 5-county region. And then there's STP Urban, which is largely what they deal with at SIMPO. It also applies to some smaller, like the city of Pinckneyville, you know, some small things that they qualify in very small ways for some urban funding, but it's largely rural and bridge money. And then there is an Illinois State Matching Assistance Program that comes into play. If you have, say, a county that doesn't have enough revenue to support the money that they're getting, because they typically have some match they have to contribute, there is at the state level, based on economic needs, a matching program. Again, there's not going to be a test. You guys don't have to understand all of this completely, but I want to just kind of give you an appreciation for the pools of money that we're talking about. This slide is really important. So everything before this is kind of formula funding, right? Based on your population and your economic conditions and things like that. You're going to get certain amounts of money from the federal and state level. Then there's a portion that's what I would consider like competitive money. And this is really what we're targeting with our planning efforts, right? So that second one, there's a big one, Highway Safety Improvement Program. So if we can put together a project and we can show objectively that if we can invest some money here, we can really improve safety. We can, any local entity can then apply to the state for competitive grant money to fix that problem. And SIMPO and Greater Egypt have been very successful with that program in particular, but there are others. There's things like Safe Routes to School, which deals with getting our kids to and from school safely. The ITEP, which is an enhancement program, so things like streetscape and you know, kind of a lot of times those are taking place in downtown areas, and even economic development programs. So this is kind of where we're focused a lot of times when we're putting together applications, because these are usually grant based. So the big monkey in the room here, the thing that's really made this plan unique is the timing of it in relation to this capital bill. So you may have heard the capital bill. I'm an Illinois resident, so I've definitely felt the capital bill and its you know, its effect from gas taxes and things like that. But on the positive side, from a transportation investment, there's a lot more money that's being spent on our infrastructure. And so you can see the highlights here on this this program from IDOT. But $20 billion over 6 years, that's a lot of money in a short time. 15.8 going to the state system, things that IDOT owns, and then almost 5 billion going to the local system. And you can see in our area here on the right side, I'm not going to read through all those, but Jefferson, Perry, and Franklin all have major projects identified from this, including the widening of I-57, which is one of the big ones. But keep in mind, this is a lot of money in context of what we typically have, you know, at the state level. There's a great investment going on here, and it's fiscal year 2022 to 27. So it's right now, you know, it's right in our study, and you're going to see the impact of this in a moment when we talk about how many of our projects can we actually fund. So we talked federal, we talked state, now we're talking local. So a lot of our local transportation dollars come from motor fuel taxes. So if you've heard the term MFT, it's motor fuel tax. It's not quite as direct as saying I spend 38 cents every time I get a gallon of gas and it goes to the state. You can see how quickly this starts splitting into different ponds and pools, and how much of it actually ends up in the local government in the bottom left, and how that's broken down between municipalities, Cook County, and other counties, and townships and road districts. So it's not as if your county engineer gets 38 cents every time you pull up to the pump, but they do get a very small amount of that to help fund their local needs and to match state monies that come in. The key here is for us to all understand what you see on the right. I picked Jackson County. This could have been any of the counties in our 5-county area and probably any county in the state. MFT funds are going down, right? So we did have the big increase because of gas taxes, but as a trend now, the amount of motor fuel taxes being collected are going down. That's in large part because gas taxes are not tied to inflation, right? So they're not tied to inflation. So no matter how much a gallon of gas is, you're always 38 cents of that's always going to taxes. Even if it's $5 a gallon, if it doubles, it doesn't matter. You're still only getting 38 cents. And keep in mind that 38 cents is funding transportation projects and construction projects that are rapidly increasing in their cost. But that's not even what's on this chart. This is saying just gross taxes collected are going down. And why would that be? Well, it's hybrid vehicles. It's the emergence of electric vehicles. It's, you know, it's not even really shown on this chart as much, but, you know, it's COVID, people driving less, people having more fuel efficient vehicles. In general, those are all good things, but they do reduce the amount of gas taxes that are collected over time. So we had to make some projections for our purposes. You know, how is this trend going to continue? Likely at some point, and this has been talked about many times at many levels, this will have to be augmented, you know, or possibly even replaced. You've heard of things like user taxes, where it's how many miles you drive, not how many gallons of gas you consume, to help pay your quote unquote fair share into transportation taxes. So this is an ongoing discussion, but that's why this comes up so much, is that trend line you see for motor fuel taxes. So we've talked about in general how many projects were submitted, and we've talked about how funding works in a general sense at the federal, state, and local level. So now we have to marry those two things. We have to say which projects are funded, which projects would we like to be funded, and then the ones that we can't fund, which ones should be funded competitively as those opportunities come up. So I mentioned earlier, there's the sheer number of projects identified and submitted. Our goal with any plan, a long-range transportation plan, is to be financially constrained. That means we want to tie all of the dollars that we foresee coming in for transportation needs to projects and basically spend them on paper like a budget, right? And then always there's a gap, that there's more projects that we'd like to do than we have money. That's always the case. However, in this case, it's much less lopsided. I'd say oftentimes when we do a plan, you might get 30% of the projects that you want to do funded, right? Because there's just never enough funding. But because, in large part, because of the capital bill and also because of the federal increase in transportation funding, we're actually in really good shape. So out of all those projects we talked about, we have 106 that are considered funded. A lot of those through the capital bill. You'll see some pink lines on the next few slides. Those are IDOT projects. So basically we have 33 that aren't. So we flip-flopped. Instead of having 30% funded, we're like 60%, 70% funded. We only have a 30% unfunded. And in the transportation world and the way federal funding talks or speaks about this, unfunded, we say illustrative, right? It's a lot more fun to say it's illustrative than to say we can't pay for it. But it basically is, these are major projects that don't have funding tied to them yet, but we'll look for grant opportunities to do so. So we had 106 funded and we had 33 unfunded. We wanted to dig down in that a little bit more. So we took those 33, we did a survey with our stakeholders, our steering committee, and with that, and we did some additional ranking, if you will, some analysis, and we basically measured these 33 projects against those goals again. And we said, okay, which of these are really the higher priority? And so with our study team and with Greater Egypt staff, we selected a top 10 list. And then we ranked those top 10 from 1 to 10. Now that's far from a final answer. It's not to say when $1 comes in, it's not already budgeted, it goes to the project, because there are different types of projects. They qualify for different types of funding, but it does give everyone a sense of what types of things we want to do outside of our traditional funding streams. And you're going to see those in detail in just a moment. So the funded projects, there's 106 of them. So I'm not on this presentation, fortunate for you, I'm not going through 106 projects and detailing them. Now in our report, which will be on the Greater Egypt website when we're done, probably in a month or so, there will be tables with all the details of, so the project name, its extent, who's the sponsor, how much does it cost, what's the funding stream. So you can kind of see how or why we think these are funded. In many cases, they're like literally funded by IDOT through the capital bill. And in other cases, we can tell based on our projected federal and state and local funding streams that it could be funded. Most of these are in 1 to 10 years. Some are 11 to 25 years. And those are, again, will be in detail in the report if you want to look at your county or your community and see what's going on specifically. But I did include each of the 5 counties in this view because I just want you to be able to see how many projects are really planned and funded already, and like who's the sponsor. So what you're seeing here, if it's a line, it's like a corridor, right? It might be a road resurfacing, it might be a sidewalk project. If it's a dot, it's a specific location. Often those are bridges, like especially if it's going over a blue little streamline, it's probably a bridge replacement. Some of those are intersections, right? But they're spot improvements. If it's pink, it's IDOT, and if it's green, it's not. So Jefferson County has a lot of projects coming, and most of them, the vast majority of them, are through IDOT, and a lot of those are through the capital bill. Not all, but a lot of them. But these are on IDOT's program, basically, if they're pink, and they may be funded in various ways. But IDOT's program is pink, and you can see Jefferson County going to have a lot of road construction. Perry County less, but still substantial, especially in the southern part of the county. You can see numerous projects around Pinckneyville. You see the corridor there, just south of Pyramid State Park. So yeah, if you're familiar with Perry County, again, in the final report, you'll be able to see these in detail. We also have an interactive map, so you can zoom in through GIS and look at the details on a spatial level too, if you like to work with maps. So moving down to Franklin County, see some major work here on I-57. And several east-west corridors as well. Again, a lot of IDOT projects, several green non-IDOT projects as well, but a lot of activity in Franklin County coming very soon. Jackson County, again, I mean, there's a common theme here. There's a lot of work going on and bridge replacements, things that have been able to address them for many years. We finally are going to be able to do that soon. So there's been kind of this backlog of projects, and we're going to be taking care of a lot of that in the next 5 to 6 years. again, to reiterate, the hashed out area is SIMPO. So you can see some of these projects extend into that just because they're on that corridor, but we're really focused outside of that hatched area. And then finally, Williamson County, they've got the most urbanized area with Carterville, Heron, and Marion, but still quite a few projects outside of that, right on the fringes of that in many cases, a mix again of IDOT and non-IDOT projects. So again, those funded projects, there's too many to go into any great detail. Of the illustrative projects, again, there were 33. We broke that down into a top 10 list, and then we ranked them roughly. And this will be in the plan document. You're welcome to comment on them. But we wanted to basically see, how many projects are realistic and where do they show up geographically. And what you'll see with these illustrative projects, they only show up in 3 counties. That's not to say there aren't other needs in the other 2 counties. It's just of the projects submitted, the other counties had enough money to pay for them all. And maybe they didn't have these like mega projects that they were thinking about and they submitted those, whereas you'll see some of these are some pretty substantial projects, but all really good projects and a really good mix of projects. There's things like trails, there's things like improving truck routes, there are connections that don't exist, there are interchanges. So a really neat mix of projects that can all compete for additional funding on their own merits because they're not really competing against each other in most cases. So this is in Jefferson County. We've got 4 projects, a multi-use trail, 7th Street truck route, Veterans Memorial Drive connection improvements, and then the Wren Lake Jefferson County multi-use trail. And that multi-use trail actually traverses 2 counties, which makes it a really valuable project because it's really serving the region, not just a specific community. But they have 4 projects. You can see we ranked them 4, 7, 8, and 9. And then we have Franklin County with 3 projects, 2 big ones here. Both the communities of Benton and West Frankfort are seeking interchange, either new interchanges or modified interchanges on I-57 to address safety, to address capacity constraints, and to improve economic development. So really in line with our project goals. These are not yet funded, but they are in various stages of approval. So I know Benton, for example, they have their conceptual approval from the federal level. I believe they've been doing phase 1 engineering. So they're really preparing to get dollars to build this. And I think they're going to build it in 2 phases. So it's not funded, it's illustrative, but it's not like a fantasy project. There's some teeth to it, and they've really done a lot of work in pursuit of that project. And then you can see right on the same screen, a sidewalk project, which you may be like, really a sidewalk project with interchanges? Well, they serve different needs, and they do meet the project goals just in different ways. So again, they wouldn't really compete with each other. They're very different projects, but we've got them ranked at 2, 5, and 6. So kind of the middle of the pack. And then the final county with illustrative projects is Jackson County. Again, very different roads. There's a Grand Tower Road that serves that community. It's an upgrade to an existing route. There's a Rock Crusher Road. It's existing route. And then the one that we ranked number 1, it really met all of our goals and it wasn't egregiously expensive, was this State Route 3 area around the levee. So, there's flooding there and there's some bad sight distance. There's basically some safety constraints. And, Route 3, of course, is one of the main ways into not just Jackson County, but the whole region. And so when that floods, it's really a major concern. So that is in there as an illustrative project as well. So we've basically got them spread between the 3 counties. And if you kind of pay attention to the rankings, they've all got some towards the top, they've all got some in the middle, and they've all got some towards the bottom of that top 10 list. So that is really it as far as the funding, the projects, what's funded, what's illustrative. Before we close out here shortly and talk about next steps and do some Q&A, I just want to kind of give a bigger perspective into what this plan is hoping to accomplish. So I talked at the very beginning about how Greater Egypt has a mission, and they've been very good at leveraging planning efforts and collaboration between communities to go compete and win federal and state money that you would never get, right? Like without this kind of efforts, it would just never happen. But they've been very proactive in doing this. And so there's a vision here, and the details will have to be worked out. In other states, there are organizations, and they have various names, but most of the time they're called Rural Transportation Planning Organization. So I talked earlier about SIMPO. That's a urban planning organization, a metropolitan planning organization, or MPO, right? And so that already exists. There, as federal money comes in for that urbanized area between Marion and Carbondale, those local communities have seats at the table, and they communicate and they prioritize, and they take that money and allocate it for the greater good, right? So it used to be very nitpicky and competitive oftentimes between any communities. These MPOs force them to collaborate. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to get off the ground, but I think everyone would say it's been a big success because they spend their money well, and most importantly, they get new money, right? They get federal money to help plan, and then they use those planning efforts to go seek competitive grants. The vision here is for Greater Egypt, the 5-county region, to do the same thing. Now, at the MPO level, at the urbanized area down there, that's required. Like, they don't have an option based on population and things. Like, they're required to administer their federal transportation funding through an MPO. The RTPO, this idea of a rural one, is not required. It's not yet required, at least. It is required in some other states. But what Greater Egypt sees is an opportunity. Hey, if we're the first in the whole state to have this unified voice, could we leverage that and get more transportation investment in our 5-county region? And I think the answer is definitely yes, right? That carries a lot of political weight. It carries a lot of administrative weight. And whenever you can submit plans, you can submit studies, and you can support grant applications that otherwise would just never happen. So this plan is a great exercise in and of itself, but it's really the first step to unlock this. So this idea that, hey, maybe we can meet on a regular basis. Maybe the 5 counties can coordinate and go after competitive grants and support each other, and collaborate and know that we're doing things for the greater good. I talked about a couple of projects that cross county lines. That's awesome. And there's a lot of projects that cross municipal lines or township lines. And thinking that way, makes the whole pie bigger, really. And so that's really what this is, hopefully heading toward, is this rural transportation planning organization, likely centered through Greater Egypt. But everyone felt, including Greater Egypt, that the first step in getting here would be this long-range transportation plan. Again, the long-range plan is required if you're an MPO, if you're in an urbanized area. It's not required for this 5-county rural area, but we believe by doing it proactively, it's going to really set up the region for success when they go compete for more transportation dollars. So where we go from here, I showed you earlier, we're near the end of the process. We've got our findings. We've kind of ironed everything out. So the first thing is getting your input. Anyone listening, anyone watching the replay, we will have, the next slide will have my email address on it. There's also ways to submit through the website. But we want your feedback, right? If there's things in here that you didn't agree with, if there's things you think we missed, if there are just things you'd want enhanced or more information about, let us know that, because we want this document to be your document. Before we do the final report, we have one more set of meetings. These will actually be in-person meetings, 2 different meetings down in the area. And we did this last summer. We're going to do it again now that we have findings to share. We're meeting with local leadership. So we're meeting with people like township supervisors, mayors, county board members, people like that, who we want to have ownership in this process, to have an appreciation of it. We want them to participate in the, potential RTPO that will be coming out of it. So we're basically just want to show them the work that's went into this and the value that it will hopefully provide. So we will be having those meetings in about 2 weeks, May 11th, I believe. And then shortly thereafter, we will submit our report to the Greater Egypt staff, see what comments they have. Then they will publish that on their website, and then you all will have a comment period where you're welcome to review the actual document. But if even anything I said today sparked questions or sparked concerns or anything like that, just let us know. We're going to do a Q&A here in a second if you want to talk today, but you can also submit those via email or through the website. But again, mid-May, keep an eye out on the on the website for this project, which I'll show you on the next slide, and you'll have an opportunity to look at the full report. This report will hopefully be very easy to digest. Our intent is to make the main body of the report very, very much a summary with a lot of graphics, and then all the technical stuff will be appendices in the back. So if you really like to nerd out and you want to know about safety analysis or financial analysis, all the detail will be there, but the front will be very easy for anyone to pick up and digest and hopefully get some use out of. So again, I'm Dustin Reekman. You can see my email right there. Feel free to hit me up with any questions you may have directly. And then the website that this presentation will be on, and also the draft plan will be on shortly, is greateregypttransportationplan.com. So with that, I'm open to any questions. I don't know, Stephen, if anyone's put anything in any chats. I know this isn't the most riveting way to spend your lunch, but I'm really appreciate you spending the time with us, and we definitely want to respect any and answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, nothing in the chat, or if folks want to raise their hand, we could also unmute you if you want to ask a question verbally. I don't see anyone raising their hand either. This is a
Yeah, I either did a really good job or they all fell asleep. Either way, I'll take it. So. Okay. Well, I'm sure some of the people listening will be seeing you in person in a few weeks. It'll be essentially the same information, but maybe a better opportunity to have some face-to-face conversations about some of our findings. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah, Mike Z posted in the chat the direct link to the website. So if it's easier for you to click on that or copy and paste it, feel free to do so. Okay, well, seeing no questions, we'll let you have the rest of your lunch hour back. Appreciate everyone's time and attention, and look forward to getting your feedback on the final plan.